And perhaps one of the most striking images, a 5-year-old wearing a blue knit bunny hat and Spider-Man backpack, detained by ICE agents. The Department of Homeland Security claims the child was detained because he was abandoned by his father, who fled the scene. There was no one present to take him in, but witnesses tell a very different story.
As I got out of my car and came around the corner, I heard, "What are you doing? Don't take the child." His mom, like, there are people here that can take him. There was another adult who lived in the home that was there saying, "I will take the child, I will take the child." Somebody else was yelling, they saw that I was there and said, "School is here, they can take the child, you don't have to take them." And there was ample opportunity to be able to safely hand that child off to adults. And mom was there, she saw.
That school official will join us later this morning. Joining us now from Minneapolis is MS Now reporter Alex Tabbitt. Alex, you have been on the ground all week in Minneapolis. Give us a sense of what's going on there.
Well, right now we're feeling a sense of defiance on the ground with thousands of people taking to the streets, as you noted, Jackie, despite the fact that it was sub-zero, -11 temperatures. And when you think about what this city, what the Twin Cities have been through in the last 6 or 7 weeks, we have the president of the United States calling the Somali diaspora, some 81,000 strong, garbage about 6-7 weeks ago. Then we saw the president launch the immigration crackdown here. Of course, a couple of weeks ago, we saw Renee Good get shot and killed. And now this last week, this heart-wrenching story about this little boy, Liam Ramos. Now, I talked to one of the thousands of protesters, a woman named Laura Seton, who came out there yesterday about why she felt the need to be out protesting. I want you to hear what she had to say.
That little boy had his family ripped away from him. We think he's somewhere in Texas. We want our neighbors home. We love them. If you look at my Carnix, I actually have a red eye and a blue eye because it's not about sides. It's about we the people. It's about protecting our neighbors, and it's about knowing our rights. There's a right and a wrong way to do this, and this is the wrong way.
And of course, there's so much heartbreak. There is so much anxiety in this community in Minneapolis right now, but there's also a resilience that's really exemplified by the march we saw through the streets yesterday. Jackie.
Alex, one of the things that has been heartening, I guess, to watch in Minneapolis is even after we saw Renee Good shot 3 times, once in the head, per this autopsy that her family did, you see the people that live there being not just resilient, but resistant and saying, you actually can't just take anybody up off the street in our community. You can't just kick people's doors down. You can't, pull someone out who is barely dressed and who happens to be documented and be able to be in this country. You can't do this to our children that live in Minneapolis. And as you're talking to folks, do they feel like, how long do they think they can hold this up? Because it is exhausting being out in the streets. It is freezing. But at the end of the day, they feel, to all of us who haven't been there with you, they feel like they could do this for a really long time and resist for as long as they need to.
That's absolutely right, Eugene. These are some of the toughest cookies I've ever met here in Minnesota. I mean, the weather doesn't bother them. They are nonstop. I mean, my phone gets text messages every 10, 15 minutes. We've spotted ice here. We've spotted ice there. We're going here. We're going there, with these ice observers who could understandably be afraid of doing the work that Renee Good when she lost her life. But instead, more and more people are volunteering to keep their fellow community members safe. I've spoken to people who have driven in from other states after the death of Renee Good to make sure that this work continues to be done. And it's important to note, Eugene, that earlier this week, the commander of the Border Patrol, Greg Bobino, who's really leading this immigration operation, he said that the resistance here in Minnesota is the best organized amongst any city that they have had this immigration crackdown. Eugene?
All right, Alex Tabbitt, Jonathan. Alex Tabbitt, thank you very much for your reporting from the Twin Cities. We're joined now by Atlantic staff writer Quinta Jurecic and MS Now political analyst and columnist for the Boston Globe, Kimberly Atkins. Thank you both very much for coming back to the weekend and being on set. There's so much, I don't even know where to begin. But how about we start, Kimberly, with the Deputy Attorney General of the United States trying to charge the woman killed by ICE for what? To blame her for her own death?
Yeah, I mean, that's gobsmacking to me, because I think a first-year law student would tell you that you cannot charge criminally somebody who is not alive. And since she died at the scene or soon thereafter, launching a criminal investigation into her seems like a waste of resources, to say the least. But we saw the narrative from immediately after that incident trying to paint her and then subsequently her wife as some sort of organized domestic terrorists who were on the attack and purposely trying to charge down law enforcement, when any number of the videos that were being taken from that scene disprove that completely. So it seems in line with that. The fact that no actual investigation, look, anytime a federal agent fires a gun that hits someone, it should immediately be an investigation, no matter the circumstances. But the fact that he was exonerated immediately, and that the people who were actually harmed are the ones who are being investigated, just tells you everything you need to know about how this Justice Department is being run.
And what about, where's Jonathan Ross, the officer who shot and killed Renee Good? Do we even know?
We know he's not under investigation.
Okay.
That's what we know. Normally what would happen is, even, look, it could very well be that an investigation found that he didn't violate any policy. That's what we need to know and understand. Generally speaking, someone will be put on administrative leave while investigation comes out, and it may very well have exonerated him in those circumstances, but we will never know, because the Justice Department has blocked that effort entirely.
Yeah, and actually, Kristi Noem was pressed on this last weekend, whether or not he was even on administrative leave, and she wouldn't say.
She still won't say. She says we're not allowed to ask where he is or say his name. Quinta, one of the things that the Associated Press wrote, this comes from Wednesday, that was shocking to me, and I think probably is shocking to a lot of people. Immigration officers assert sweeping power to enter homes without a judge's warrant. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I didn't go to law school. I took like one law class, but I know that does not seem to comport with what the Constitution says. I'm going to read this. The memo authorizes ICE officers to use force to enter a residence based solely on a more narrow administrative warrant to arrest someone with a final order of removal. The administrative warrants only require approval from an ICE official. So I don't know if that official is like me with no law background, but here we are. When you hear something like that, and the way that this administration is just deciding which parts of the Constitution they want to follow and which parts of the Constitution we all get to enjoy, what does that tell you about where we are right now, and now in year two of Trump 2.0?
You're absolutely right that that is deeply at odds with, I think, most, if not all, understandings of the Fourth Amendment. The whole idea of the Fourth Amendment is that you have the right to some kind of judicial process before your home is entered. And what ICE is doing here is essentially saying, you know, we're only going to have an approval process entirely within the executive branch, and that is sufficient for us to come in and break down your door. And I think that explains a lot of the really disturbing images that we've been seeing in Minneapolis and elsewhere of, you know, ICE and other DHS agents coming in, breaking down doors, when I had understood, I think most lawyers had understood, that, you know, the home is a place where they can't enter unless they have a judicial warrant. So I think it is very much in line with this really disturbing centralization of power in the executive branch, which this administration has also argued is entirely centralized in Donald Trump personally, and a way of asserting essentially that they can do whatever they want.
I mean, he always says he's the chief law enforcement officer of the country.
Yeah, and I want to slightly veer into the new element of ICE's operations that we are seeing play out in real time that I think is, if there is anything that I think is potentially causing Trump supporters or people who weren't normally paying attention to this to now pay attention, it is ICE's treatment of children, using them as pawns to attract their operation targets and, the various palette of ways and ways of attracting these targets that they're using children. But I want to get to this thought from Greg Bovino, who I'm not sure if he was speaking facetiously or not, but he claimed that the Border Patrol had some fantastic childcare in light of several new revelations this week.
That child is in the least restrictive setting possible. When I say that we're experts, both Border Patrol and ICE, in dealing with immigration cases that involve children, probably the most experienced anywhere in the United States by any domestic law enforcement agency, challenge any other law enforcement agency anywhere nationwide to show me the fantastic care that ICE and U.S. Border Patrol provide children.
That is nuts.
Should these children even be in custody in the first place?
No, they should be in their homes. They should be safe. And just to, underscore a point that you were making, Jackie, is that there are people are being detained in front of their children, and their children are left on the scene with no supervision. There's reports of ICE officials using children to try to lure people outside of their homes in order to apprehend. This is abominable. Remember the outcry that happened in Trump's first term just from children being separated from their parents. If the goal is to go after criminals, people who are the worst of the worst in this country, I don't understand how a 5-year-old can be deemed a dangerous criminal to the point that they have to be detained and have to get this wonderful care that is allegedly there for children.